All right. Good evening and welcome to all of those who are joining us both in person as well as those joining us online to learn about your city's budget. My name is Erica Melton and I'm the Director of Administrative Services for the city. And for this evening's presentation, we're going to begin by going through the city's budget process, followed by discussing the fiscal year 2025-2026 and giving a brief budget overview, and concluding by discussing next steps. So, in terms of the city's budget process, we generally have a three-phase budget process for the city. We begin by doing strategic planning and program assessment. The goal of this phase is to align the community's priorities and needs, wherein the city council's goals, priorities, as well as the city's operations are discussed in order to, again, create that alignment. This is an ongoing iterative process that happens throughout the year with special touch points, especially in January and February of each year, in the form of a community survey, which is available online, and that's usually still open for some time, as well as we hold a special City Council strategic goals study session, which this year was conducted in February, on February 14th, and we'll discuss the outcome of that discussion shortly. Phase two of our budget development process is where the city manager establishes the budget directive. And that budget directive includes the theme as well as the overarching budget principles based on short and long term financial and organizational goals. This phase also includes preparing the economic outlook, where we look at forecast for both the federal, state, as well as local economy in order to provide a foundational understanding of the financial environment in which the city is operating. Staff uses this guiding information to develop its budget packets, which are then reviewed by the city manager for requested changes above and beyond usually current operations. And the outcome of these decisions are then compiled into the proposed budget, which is what we're going to review tonight. Phase three, once the proposed budget is presented to City Council, there are a series of budget study sessions that are held to deep dive into each department's proposal, as well as the city manager's enhancement recommendations. After the study sessions are completed, a public hearing is scheduled, and the City Council adopts the annual budget with any necessary revisions made between the time of the proposed budget publication up to the adoption date. The annual budget is effective July 1st, and this year's public hearing is tentatively scheduled for the second meeting in June, which is June 16th. I want to take a moment to pause and reflect on phase one, which is again that strategic planning and program assessment phase. That's the phase in which the city council hosts their annual strategic goals and priorities meeting, which again this year took place in February. This slide highlights the top priorities provided to departments through city council to address in their budget development. Those priorities included addressing parking challenges, enhancing patrol coverage and effectiveness, citywide recruitment, retention, and morale, public property and right-of-way beautification, parks, seating and gathering spaces, crime prevention and deterrence, homelessness services, supporting local business community, report accountability to city council, and revitalizing the Cindy Montañez Park. So again, those are the priorities that were established through city council. Those were distributed. In some cases, some areas are not incorporated directly as enhancements in the 25-26 budget, which we'll discuss because they were incorporated either through other funding sources or through current work plan initiatives. But the budget study session is really, really helpful for that discussion, and I'll go through that in a little bit more detail. So the proposed 25-26 budget. The theme of this year's budget is prioritizing financial stability during economic uncertainty. So based on this theme, the recommended resources included in the fiscal year 25-26 budget address one or more of the following parameters: advancing city council strategic priorities, and these are, again, those priorities that I just showed on the screen as identified during the special study session. Reorganizing department or operations to advance these priorities. And the goal is to better position each department and functional area to move city council goals and priorities forward while minimizing the impact on other areas, including post-employment benefits. So the goal was to figure out opportunities where we could offset either by increased revenues or by offsetting alternative expenses in other areas. Investing in technology for improved operations. The goal is to give staff better tools to work more effectively, to streamline workflows, and improve service delivery to, again, move those city council goals and priorities forward. And finally, prioritizing enhancements that support the financial and operational stability in the midst of this economic uncertainty. With that stated, the proposed budget represents $62.2 million in resources for operations and to address the citywide priorities. While there are a number of funding areas, which, as you see on the screen, that pie chart includes governmental funds, which are primarily our general funds. And our general funds are typically the funds that we get from revenues in the city by way of sales tax, property tax, and they fund the local operations of the city. Most of the local services that we see in terms of our police operations, public works, just most of the day-to-day operations. So the remainder of our presentation in terms of the numbers will focus primarily on the governmental or general funds. However, in addition to that, it does include special revenue funds. Those special funds are usually earmarked for very special intended purposes, and that represents about $14.7 million of the city's budget. And finally, proprietary funds, which include our internal service funds as well as enterprise funds, and that represents about $18.9 million of the overall $62.2 million budget that is proposed for this year. So what do those numbers mean? Well, when we compare it to the previous year, it does represent from general funds about a 1% decrease. And part of that decrease is because significant investments were made in the prior year. Because as we have revenue growth, we're able to pre-fund a lot of our reserve balances. This year, revenues were budgeted primarily flat, and I'll get into that in some of the subsequent slides. And those reserve investments weren't made this year. In addition, we made significant enhancement investments in the prior year. And again, a lot of those were not, are based upon that revenue growth, which again, because of flat revenues for this year, we ended up pulling back on those. There are some enhancement recommendations, however, which total about $266,000. Those are included to address the priorities. In terms of internal service funds, those have increased. Those are the result of increases in our insurance premiums as well as in some of our self-insurance funds in order to fund them at the level in order to support operations, because as labor increases in those areas, the budget subsequently increases as well. Enterprise funds, there is a 12.26% decrease. However, that is primarily the result of unspent capital funds that'll be carried forward into the next year to finish some of the major capital projects, both in terms of reservoir, sewer line projects. And again, some of those funds are reflected in 24-25, but as they're unspent, they'll be carried forward into the subsequent year. And finally, special revenue funds. That looks like a scary drop of 67.5%, but that is similar to enterprise funds, where there's a lot of grant and CIP funds reflected there. And usually when we budget those are a lot of multi-year projects. And so we carry those forward until the project is done. So one year might look really big because we have all the funds there, but we'll carry those forward for unspent projects into the subsequent year. Special funds also include right now $1.2 million in new funding for phase 4 of our road resurfacing project, as well as $5 million to pay CalPERS or our retirement costs for the city. I do want to highlight, because I've spoken to the fact that we've kept our revenues primarily flat in the general fund area. The reason why we've done this is for a couple of reasons, and I'll go in more depth. It's primarily because we've got 5 major revenue categories that account for about 84% of the city's overall general fund revenues. Those include our sales and transaction use tax revenue, where, of course, on the bottom of your receipt, there's now a 10.5% sales tax that's applied to most purchases. And the city receives about 1.75% of that. To put this in perspective, for every dollar in sales tax paid in San Fernando, the city receives about 17 cents of that. And the state and county agencies receive the remaining 83 cents. But what we do receive accounts for about 41% of our overall revenue budget. And this year, we're projecting that at about $11.8 million. The next major category is property taxes, and that accounts for about 16% of our overall budget. The city receives approximately 15 cents of every dollar in property tax paid by San Fernando property owners. The remaining amount is distributed to LA County agencies and local school districts. So to put that one in perspective, if you pay $1,000 in property tax, the city only receives about 150 of that. The next category is vehicle license fees, which account for 12%. Vehicle license fees, these fees are derived as vehicles are purchased and transmitted through the Department of Motor Vehicles to the respective local jurisdiction of residency. So this is going to be my shameless plug that we shop local. We've got a number of, course, car dealerships in the area, so we want to support them. But the benefit is that the city receives both the property tax, we receive both the vehicle license fee in addition to the sales tax fee if you purchase a vehicle in the city. But if you go somewhere else, far out in a land far, far away, but far, far away in California, the city would only reap the vehicle license fee. So, of course, it's more beneficial if the city were able to reap both. The next category, which accounts for 10% of our overall revenue, is charges for services. Charges for services includes fees for various services provided to users deriving a direct benefit from provision of services. So some of the examples for this include construction permits, inspection fees, even live scan fingerprint fees across the street at police department, special police services. So there's a variety of fees that we incorporate in what we call our annual fee schedule. But our goal is to charge at a rate that recovers the full cost of that service, so that anyone who's deriving a benefit from that service, the city's not subsidizing. So we want to recover as much of that as possible. And that accounts, again, for about 10% of our overall revenue structure. Finally, business license fees account for about 6%, and the city benefits from a successful local business economy, which brings me back to that plug about shopping locally. Business license fees are imposed on certain businesses, trade professions, and occupations that are outlined in our city's code, and that's on a gross receipt basis. And because those businesses derive a benefit from the city in terms of their streets being paved, um, uh, to just us operating as a city, because of that, we do charge what we call a business license fee. And as we receive that, again, it benefits the city and accounts for about 6% of our overall revenue structure. And then there's just all the other stuff, which is only 15% that's left. And this year, we are projecting general fund revenues at $28.8 million. But let's talk a little bit more about those revenues and those revenue categories and how we forecast for those. So again, the city's top 5 revenue categories, which again are sales taxes, property taxes, vehicle license fees, charges for services, and business licenses. Again, they account for about 85% of the city's total $28 million in general fund revenues. And of these five categories, sales taxes and business licenses account for approximately 50% of revenues. And those are extremely sensitive to changes in economic conditions. As we know right now, there's a lot of shifts in economic policy. And so as those filter down to our local economy, we are forecasting this next year's budget with a lot of conservatancy because we want to ensure that we have the ability to pivot on account of these economic changes. And again, that's one of the reasons for this year's budget theme, which is again, and I want to highlight our budget theme, as we are prioritizing financial stability during economic uncertainty. And again, recognizing that those categories are the most volatile. We work really, really closely with um, various consultants who assist us and are able to help not only forecast for our local economy, but are forecasting across the state as well. And so they understand the conditions in which we're operating and are forecasting, especially in the area of our sales and transaction taxes. So that's one of the reasons that we, again, were leaving this year's revenues primarily flat, again, to account for limited growth, but at the same token, making sure that we're, again, able to pivot in the midst of this uncertainty. So I just wanted to highlight that. And again, just know that the city is, again, currently opting to remain flat in revenues rather than expanding. And again, that's just out of an abundance of caution. And we'll talk through some ways that we'll be monitoring both the revenues and our expenditures going forward. So that's revenue land. Expenditures. All right. So we talked about how we're going to acquire the funds for the city. Let's talk about how we spend those funds. Historically, 95% of the city's annual expenditures are fixed cost. And like most operations, the majority of those costs are personnel costs. The city has been able to restore a number of positions in order to, again, make sure that the service delivery to the community is stellar and top notch. And in accordance with that, and again, like most operations, that then means that your personnel costs are, again, a majority of your budget. And for the city, unlike any other operation, it accounts for over 60% of our overall budget. So that's about 64% that we have budgeted in personnel costs for the upcoming year. The second major category is contractual services. The city contracts a variety of services that are negotiated and that assist in areas that so that we can contain personnel costs. We're able to control this by, again, making sure and monitoring this category. So examples of our contractual services include fire services, which we of course contract out to the LA City Fire Department. We do contract our legal city attorney services as well as animal control, engineering, as well as IT managed services. So again, those have been negotiated usually at fixed rates or at negotiated rates over multiple years so that, again, we're able to contain and control those costs. Another category that is, again, that fixed cost category are internal service charges. Those are charges issued to each department on a cost reimbursement basis for essentially the overhead of the city. That includes our self-insurance because we self-insure as a city. That includes upkeep of our facilities as well as upkeep of the vehicles, including maintaining vehicles as well as replacing vehicles. So if we were to talk about those three categories alone, that accounts for about 95% of the city's overall budget, which leaves us about 5% left for other categories. 3% is just operations and maintenance, which includes supplies for department, just regular things that a department needs to operate, toner, also like software subscriptions, things along those lines. In addition, this year's budget incorporates, again, that 267,000 in recommended enhancements by the city manager in order to address some of those priorities which were listed earlier through the city council. So in order to address those, there have been some strategies that have been recommended through the departments, and the city manager has approved approximately 267,000 of that. That leaves a small surplus of about $149,000 that's remaining for discretion, and that's a big part of the discussions that will take place going forward through the budget study sessions that will happen over the next few weeks. So to recap, in terms of the general fund, projected revenues are about $28.8 million. So the money that we have coming in, and just like your personal budget, the city's goal is to collect more than it spends out. And again, those revenues do remain relatively flat compared to the prior year. And the way that we receive those revenues are through funds collected through taxes, service fees, and fines. Expenditures are projected at $28.6 million. Those also have been reduced to align, again, with those overall revenue goals, but they do include and incorporate 267,000 approximately in city manager recommended enhancements. Of that, 208,000 are one time or ongoing, and about 58,000 are one time. And that then leaves that budget surplus of $149,340 that could either be moved to the general fund reserve or fund additional city council priorities. And again, those discussions will happen in the next few weeks. But I do want to spend a few minutes highlighting some of the recommended enhancements. So I've mentioned that 267,000 in city manager recommended enhancements a few times. Let's go over that in a little bit more detail. So one of the areas that were highlighted in the uh, city council priorities included patrol coverage and effectiveness. So this budget includes funding about 20,000 for new officer onboarding. This funding is recommended to continue recruitment-related expenses to fill remaining officer vacancies. And so this usually includes the pre-employment test, exams, the uniforms, the equipment necessary for a new officer. The next item is upgrading one police officer to a sergeant. The city typically incurs overtime at the sergeant rate due to the current structure of our organization. And so the police department has recommended upgrading one of those positions so that it can assist, especially during times of planned absences, as well as provide some other administrative uh, service coverage. And the goal is to reduce and cover this through some of the overtime expenses that have been previously incurred. The next item under patrol coverage and effectiveness is less lethal equipment. And the recommendation here is for 2 additional less lethal pieces of equipment to add to our existing stock to ensure that the multiple patrol vehicles have these tools available. And this is a one-time cost of $5,000. The other enhancements under this category include leveraging technology to improve effectiveness, and this includes both a scheduling software to assist with more efficient and automated scheduling of officers, which will also link to our citywide timekeeping software. And in addition to that, an evaluation and training software for performance management designed specifically to support law enforcement agencies. The next category is public property and right-of-way beautification. And funding is recommended in this area at a one-time cost of $5,000 to continue special legal services to just resolve some of the existing code enforcement cases and address blighted and unsafe conditions throughout the city. And the final category is citywide recruitment, retention, and morale. One of the initial funding recommendations is through the Human Resources Division to provide citywide training and development opportunities throughout the city to all city staff at a one-time cost of $25,000. The next area is to upgrade an existing vacant position in the Public Works Department, a management analyst to a senior management analyst, in order to enhance experience and leadership capacity. Um, the next is to upgrade a Public Works senior maintenance worker to a Public Works supervisor, and this is to assist with span of control and improve oversight in field operations. The next area is in the Recreation and Community Services Department, where the aim is to upgrade 2 program specialists and offset part-time recreation leader hours in order to upgrade to 3 community services coordinators to enhance the department's ability to provide a broader range of community programs. And then finally, there's a $2,000 ongoing funding requests for supplies, games, crafts, outreach materials to support the after-school teen program. So with that, that concludes all of the recommendations as well as the overview of the budget. But in terms of next steps in the city's budget process, the question is what happens next? So we've put a proposed budget on the city's website. We've dropped a 300-page book on the city council to provide it to each city council member. So what did we do with all of that data, all of that information? So first, the goal is to review it. But instead of reviewing all 300 pages, my goal is to give you all a little bit of the cheat sheet today. So I would always suggest start with the city manager's budget message. It really outlines in thorough detail the why behind both the theme as well as the why behind each of the recommendations that were made and incorporated into the enhancements. It additionally addresses the fact that yes, there were $267,000 in city manager recommended enhancement requests, but that's probably out of close to $1 million in department requests that were put before him in terms of strategies to address some of the overall priorities that were listed. So again, I would start there because it's about 10 pages. It's light reading. You can skip the forecast, economic forecast, if the numbers dull you. However, there's a couple of sections again within there that again are very that very comprehensively outline the why behind the budget theme as well as the overall numbers. So it gives some context to the numbers. But if you do like the numbers, check out the budget overview. The budget overview section outlines by those types of funds that I mentioned earlier, governmental, our internal services, enterprise funds, as well as special revenue funds. And it compares prior year versus what we're proposing for the upcoming year. The general fund overview, again, the numbers, but it goes in depth in terms of comparing current year and actually projecting out. There's even a 5-year forecast in there, but it also goes back multiple years. So it's overall 10 years where you see past history as well as going forward. And finally, if you've got a department that you're just really rooting for, that's where the department budget pages are probably your area of interest. And so I invite you to check those out in more detail. They do include each department's accomplishments for the current fiscal year. So the year that we're currently in, it outlines some of the things that they've already accomplished and or some of the things that are currently underway that are planned to be completed before or by June 30th. It also incorporates the work plan for next year. So if there's things within a department that you are seeking to ensure that it gets done, that's the area that you also want to focus on. And again, the city's proposed budget is located currently on the city's webpage. You don't have to dig around between the departments or areas if you allow it to scroll through because today's event is listed there in terms of learning about your city budget. You can just click on that link and it'll take you directly to the proposed budget area. Additionally, in terms of what happens next is we're going to deep dive into each of those department areas. We're going to deep dive into each of those enhancements, and the way that we do those is through the budget study sessions. Those will take place through city council meetings on beginning May 19th, which is next Monday. The presenting departments for that date will be the city manager's office, where he not only presents on behalf of his department, but he also provides the overall city overview. So similar to what I'm doing tonight, he'll provide a overview and an overall lens in terms of the 25-26 budget. Uh, He'll additionally, again, provide his own department's budget, followed by our very lovely city clerk's office, who's here with us today. Give them a Vanna wave for us, Julia. Thank you so much. That'll be followed by the Administrative Services Department, which is my own area. So come by, ask questions. I welcome them. And then the Community Development Department. And that'll conclude all of the budget study presenting departments for May 19th. On Tuesday, May 27th, it will be a special council meeting. And that is another budget study session, and it will be specifically for the Recreation and Community Services Department, Police Department, and Public Works, where they'll present both their operating as well as capital improvement plan budgets. We've additionally earmarked Monday, June 2nd to go into further discussion if needed, with a tentative date of the budget adoption and that public hearing occurring on Monday, June 16th. While we're presenting the proposed budget here, it doesn't stop the conversation. We want to continue it both through the study sessions as well as through the My San Fernando app. I always plug that because we use a lot of the data in order to drive decision-making in terms of priorities in the city. And of course, we continue to encourage everyone to make sure that you're involved in our How Are We Doing community survey, because that also informs, as you heard earlier when we had the city council study session developing those top 10 priorities, that informs that conversation. So we encourage everyone to participate through those channels, as well as to participate through the budget study sessions. Um, that concludes my presentation for this evening, and I welcome questions both for those who are here present with us in the chamber, as well as those who are online. Thank you. I want you to repeat that.
Oh, I'm sorry. Well, it's not a question. It's just that I'm always amazed at how much goes into running a city. It's over the years I've been attending a lot of the meetings, and especially the police department. But yeah, that's about all I can think of. Thanks.
Well, I just want to highlight, because that was a great comment, but all the work we do is exactly, it's for you, it's for the residents of San Fernando. And so we, for that reason, have these forums so that we can make sure that the way that it is running is, again, in alignment with the way that you want to see it run. There are going to be some things that we get perfect, but more often than not, there's going to be some things that we need to tweak. And the budget is the city's value, the city's priorities with value, with price tags. So as we understand what those values are, we do incorporate them in this document. And in some cases, it's at the sacrifice of something that we've been doing for a long time, because there's a lot of stop in that document in terms of things that departments are, ended up finding that, hey, we can stop doing this in order to make room so that we can do and achieve these other priorities. So thank you.
I try to keep my dollars in San Fernando. I've always tried to do that, buy local, etc. I'm actually surprised that not more of my property tax dollars stay in the city. I'm actually really shocked about that. Why does the LA County take so much of our money? Because
I think you asked and answered that right here in the audience, because they can. Property taxes are a complicated conversation. And in fact, we might just set up a town hall to just go over property taxes, because I think that that's a really, really good question. And it's not just the county. You got to remember the school district. Every time we pass Um, every time we pass a measure that we approve, that we want to give more to something in either, again, the county through one of their local measures or through our school districts, the aggregate of that ends up, of course, going outside of the city. Um, we do use the dollars that we get here to the best of our ability, and so, yeah, but property taxes is a complicated issue, and in fact, I think that that's a great conversation that we can set up a town hall and go specifically more in depth in terms of not only, learning about your city budget, but where do my property tax dollars go? I think that's a great conversation, and probably we get even more people here.
Just thought of something that, you have mentioned several times how this annual budget is, and you had a definition for it, on the, exactly, economic uncertainty. But the bulk of this, well, my understanding of the uncertainty has been coming on, and we'll say the bad word, tariffs, in the last few months. But this budget has been in the works since you started it, I guess, in July of last year or at the end of July or something.
So in terms of the budget development process for 25, 26, we typically start that around January, February is when we start looking at economic forecasts, start working with our consultants. And you're exactly right. It has been a tireless effort because every day it's been a change where we may have had like a version, one by the time we're here in this meeting, we're probably at iteration number 156 because of all the changes. And again, in the end, because there was so much uncertainty, that's what led us to this theme, prioritizing financial stability during economic uncertainty. We don't know what's to become of and how all of this is going to trickle down even to our local economy. So amongst the goal is again to at least not demonstrate growth that we may or may not achieve, but rather because it's always easier to add than to subtract. And so the notion was let's start as flat as we can. And instead of us, because right now our financial policy and typically our routine is that we do a mid-year report and then that's what kicks off the next budget cycle. Instead, as a part of my department's work plan, is that we're going to be doing quarterly monitoring instead, because that'll give us the ability to be a little bit more fluid throughout the year should the economic conditions change, whether it's growth or constriction. But in either way, it will allow us again to be aware and to make decisions along the way as opposed to just at the midpoint.
Another observation I've had over the years, the city got into some major problems, gosh, what, 2010, 11, even maybe before that, where they overspent. They were spending a lot more money than they were getting in, apparently. And it has been my observation, it seems that we're much more physic,
Fiscally?
yeah,
Fiscally.
fiscally um, uh, responsible nowadays. And in fact, how are we doing on that? Uh, the debt that we had accumulated
Oh,
many years ago.
that's a great question and an opportunity for us to uh, both sing the praises of all of the decision makers who've been a part of the process in the city for some time. As of the audited financials of June 30th, 2024, we currently were, in your example, and we had a negative general fund balance. That it wasn't just an operating deficit; it was that we also had negative reserves, and so that was a huge issue. Now the city has close to $10.9 million in its general fund reserves. Uh, the negative was, I believe, as of 2015, and I mean,
Yeah,
not
okay, I
2015.
thought you said 2024, but 2015, yeah,
No,
that
it's been,
sounds,
yeah, we hit the 10-year mark. I usually have a slide that I have for that one. Did I hide it? I'll find it in a second. So by the time we get the next question, but yeah, it's been approximately 2010. Okay. So yeah, so we've hit that mark, and not only that, but we've grown substantially since then. And so um, it's the result of, again, making prudent financial decisions so that we don't put ourselves in, again, either an operating deficit to the effect that we're not generating enough revenues to cover those expenses. It's us monitoring in order to ensure on an annual basis that what we budgeted is actually what we achieve. And then it's also us, again, in times of growth, making sure that we use that as an opportunity to invest in those reserves so that in instances and, again, times of economic uncertainty, or if it got to the point of economic instability, that we've got reserves to cover, and are prepared to cover those operating expenses even in the midst of that. Mad at myself because I have a slide normally for that, and I literally like must have deleted it right before I got here. But I usually include that. I did a presentation during the transaction tax town hall where I and why that occurred in terms of how the city got in that position. And you're exactly right. But it was a perfect storm. Okay, it was this notion of you're in a great position, everything's going fine, and then what happens when everything goes south, okay? We know what to do when things go right, but do we have what it takes when it goes left? And now I do believe that the city's in a position for both right and left, and the goal is, again, even within our current year, to not just tap in unnecessarily, but if there's opportunities that we can look at before we get to that. Okay, we're also checking for those who are joining us in YouTube land, so feel free to chime in with any questions. We'll probably continue and have a couple of slides available. And I know we've got still some audience members, so we'll just chat, and if anything comes up, we'll be certainly responsive. That's for our folks who are here. Now I want to find that slide, though. It's going to bother me. So, so there, there was definitely the LA, the regional pool now. It's now the regional. And we were able to offset that debt by selling and having the county take over in that respect. But you're exactly right. Not to mention, a pool is expensive. You have to keep a lifeguard on duty like at all times, whether there's people like, so there's the personnel expense, there's keeping the pool warm, there's keeping it sanitary, and so there's a lot of expense that comes with that. And so again, at the time, it felt right, but then there was the recession. Then because of the recession, there was also where we were receiving money through our redevelopment agency, the state of California RDAs. And so once they got rid of the state, because they were having their own economic issues, their solution was to eliminate that at the local level. So it's, again, that's why when we're doing, and that budget message becomes important, because it incorporates not just this is what we're doing, but this is why we're doing it, because this is what's going on at the economic level. This is what's going on at the state economic. And we're keeping our thumb on all of that, all while still monitoring what's happening right here in San Fernando as well. So that's our objective. And like we said, there's going to be parts of it that, again, we know that when you're looking at all of that all at once, trying to put it all together, again, it's right for something. And our goal is to make sure, again, that we get enough input through the process as possible so that we can produce the right output for the city. But again, we're going to bring you along in the process with us. I don't want us, as long as I'm at that desk, my goal is for us to never get to the point where it's just like, what happened to the city's finances? No, we've been talking about it the whole time. We knew what we were proposing as a budget. We then had monitoring reports along the way. So again, it's giving us the ability to say, we know as a city what's going on with our finances. There will be no secrets. Well, this was a lovely 45-minute dialogue. And we look forward to either seeing you all in person or online throughout the study sessions. Again, the proposed budget book is online. Please, we welcome you to review it, but again, just listen in throughout the study sessions because they're really informative in terms of, again, going into those bullet points in a little bit more depth. All of the department heads who have made the recommendations, they're going to go into more detail about their operations and their why as well. All right? And not to mention, you got to remember, that last slide showed that we still have $149,340, if my math is mathing, that the city council decides how to use that surplus. They could either put it in reserves so that we are, again, growing that reserve balance, or they can identify other priorities that those funds should be deployed for. So be a part of that conversation as well. All right? And again, thank you all so much for your time.